So welcome back to Reimagine here in January of 2021. I keep saying that number and it keeps still blowing my mind. I'm joined today by a special guest, someone who's going to talk to us about an industry dear to my heart, the crypto mining space. We're speaking with Taras Kulyk, the Core Scientific's Senior Vice President of Blockchain Business Development. Taras, firstly, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Asher. And I have to correct you that 2020 did not win. We're in 2021 these days, so it's 2021.
Yeah, no,
You have to
2021.
just roll it right down.
It kills me. It kills me. It kills me. It's good. You're right. We made it. We made it. We got through. All right. So firstly, all right, for our viewers who aren't like ultimately familiar with your work over there at Core Scientific, just give us the brief rundown, what you guys are up to, where your field is, and what you're known for.
Okay, sure. Yeah, Core Scientific is an infrastructure hosting services provider, and really a large-scale infrastructure provider for AI, high-performance computing, as well as blockchain mining, so digital asset mining. So what that means is we have very large facilities across 3 different states in the United States, where we basically manage hundreds of megawatts of power and hardware equipment for high-performance computing on the AI side, as well as the digital mining side, primarily BTC mining, but also tens of thousands of GPU miners for the altcoin industry as well.
So I mean, crypto mining is a pretty growing space at the moment. As with most things in the digital asset space, I've seen a pretty good uptick at the moment. Could you sort of give us a little bit of a state of the state sort of situation, a state of the industry, how it's grown and how it's benefited from the sort of latest upsurge in the markets as a whole?
Yeah, so I mean, I would start with saying that the industry has really passed through an inflection point over 2020 and into 2021. We're now looking at an industry that really is stepping into its own. We're seeing material interest from institutional investors, financial institutions globally. They're looking at digital mining as a way to gain exposure to digital assets without necessarily buying the underlying equity, the asset itself. Where that started from is really the basements of the world and the dark pools and the hacker community areas where people were essentially mining BTC or other digital assets using spare computational power, CPU, GPU primarily. However, over the past decade, call it, ASICs, application-specific integrated circuitry, has really taken over the industry, and we're getting really specific hardware that is primarily designed for one specific algorithm, or maybe 2 or 3 tops, for it to be really called a true ASIC. And that's really taken over the industry fully. And the reason I bring that up is because right now, the industry is extremely hot. I mean, there's a ton of activity, tons of capitals coming in. The issue is there's a supply chain constraint that really starts with access to chips and really high quality silicon wafers from the foundries of TSMC, SMIC, and really now Samsung, who's actually coming into their own within this sector. So that's really a really broad level overview where China has been the primarily dominant player within hash rate generation for mining. But North America is really stepping up based on the availability of capital, the professionalization of the space, and candidly, the scale of some of the facilities that we're building with Core Scientific being one of the leaders in that space for real enterprise size scaled facilities, professional hosting services, audited financials, the things that you would expect in the technology industry. We're really at the forefront of bringing to digital mining for North America.
So I mean, and you sort of already put it there, but just to confirm, the nail is in that coffin right there. Is the home mining rig that sort of like crypto cypherpunk, crypto anarchist, or even just sort of amateur home mining operation sort of thing? Is that dead in the water? I mean, are we at full scale, professionalized industrial scale mining across the board from now on?
Some people in the space probably won't like to hear it, but I think that we are at that point at this going forward. I mean, you need to have large-scale, efficient operations for you to be able to compete properly on a global basis, because really this market is a global market. It's no longer competing with the moms and pop folks and the smaller operations. I would even argue that anything smaller than a 10 megawatt facility, or maybe even 50, depending on which geographic region you're in, is probably too small to be sustainable for the long term. You're really looking at larger facilities, 100 megawatts, 50 megawatts, and plus to really get to the economies of scale to be truly competitive. I mean, what we're doing is securing the blockchain networks that people are relying on to be part of the financial ecosystem now. You know, with the recent rulings within the US and globally with, you know, the ECB in Europe as well, looking at digital assets as truly a new wave of financial exchange medium. We really need to make sure that the network is secured properly and in an efficient way. So a lot of the smaller operators really weren't being as efficient as possible. So as the industry really grows up and matures and evolves, becomes truly a backbone for financial transactions, that scale will drive down operating costs, and a lot of those folks who have higher operating costs will not be able to survive. So, you know, I equate it to roads and bridges. You know, if you're a small contracting company, there is no way you're going to build a bridge. If you're a large construction company with engineers, with the right teams in place, you can build bridges across the country, right? The same kind of thing with digital mining. I mean, it really is a scale play at this point with proper enterprise type growth and with the engineering teams that you need, the software development teams for fleet management systems. You know, all these things create barriers to entry, frictions, and really force the industry to scale properly.
So, I mean, you know, speaking of that industry to scale, you mentioned something earlier that I want to touch in on, because as the industry has been growing and as we've seen, you know, the demand for, you know, new mining rigs set up, new ASICs getting set up, as you said, there's that supply chain issue that affects the market so much, that chip logistics, that chip supply chain issue, you know, centrally coming out of China. And this is something that's pretty salient in the minds of a lot of people who are aware of the chip space and China's role in that, obviously brought to the fore with various trade relations issues over the last few years. And I spoke actually recently with one of your peers, I guess, as it were, Emiliano Grodzki from Bitfarms, who said the exact same thing, that they were having the exact same sort of issues. I mean, what can be done about this? Is this a huge problem? Is this just a small stepping stone that needs to be passed? You know, sort of what's the scale of this issue and how can it be resolved?
Well, the scale of this issue really is global. I mean, the digital mining industry is just one of the industries affected by the lack of high quality silicon production capacity on a global basis. This is being addressed by some of the major players. TSMC, Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing company, is actually building an onshored foundry within the United States. I believe it's Arizona. That should be coming online in 2022, 2023. Samsung has poured billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars into their own foundry capacity. So the industry is adjusting. The growth has just been too fast for them to potentially contemplate to be able to get the capital in place, you know, half a decade ago to build one of these foundries. Because it really is a CapEx investment of several $billion to build a high quality silicon wafer manufacturing facility. I mean, these things are huge facilities with a long lead time, so the growth was unprecedented, really. So we were really the victims of our own success, so to speak, when it comes to the procurement and hardware industry itself. But things are changing. We've got, like I said, the facility coming online here in North America within the next 2 years. Malaysia is really stepping up onto its own to become another hardware center. Other areas within Southeast Asia are really stepping up based on their lower labor costs, obviously. So I'd say over the next 24 months to 5 years, you know, this constraint will probably be eased, and you'll find more of an equilibrium based on hash rate projections, price projections, and a lot more stability on pricing as well versus the massive spikes we've seen recently in the secondary and candidly primary hardware markets as well. You can look at gold. The gold industry is a really good canary in the coal mine based on long-term pricing and the development of large-scale production projects for gold. I mean, that's really the thinking that a lot of digital mining folks are looking at now, so that, you know, we can think in 5-10 years versus the next halving, which is in, you know, 2024 expected to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly a key issue, and there's been some interesting results that have come from it. And I know this is actually something that you've spoken about in the past. I've seen some of your speaking and writings that are talking about the influence that this chip and logistics demand has meant that so much of the mining operations still exist inside China. That there's sort of they had the better access and the closer access to the chips, and obviously access to cheap energy. In the Sichuan province, those hydroelectric projects that gave off all that cheap energy. But I mean, as a major mining operation existing in North America and outside China, do you feel the constraints of being away from that can you compete, I guess, is the question, and how's the trends in the industry changing?
Absolutely, we can compete, and we've been competing quite successfully. I mean, we really have been giving the industry pause to show that North America really is a new center for growth within digital mining. You have companies like Core, companies like Riot, companies like Marathon Patent Group, who've all done extremely well in being able to source large-scale volumes of equipment. I mean, Marathon itself has raised almost $500 million in the past quarter, and most of that's been dedicated to equipment of what their use of proceeds have been explained to the market. So that in itself is really making the manufacturers turn and say, wow, North America really is a huge growth engine right now. We need to reevaluate where our priorities are. And obviously the political the political and environmental and economic risk in North America is very stable. I mean, it's a lot lower than it is in other jurisdictions that have been primarily the centers of digital mining. With clarity in regulations, clarity of political perspective and support, especially, we are looking like one of the main regions to operate in for the long haul. If you're going to be parking $100 million, are you going to be parking it in a barren land with very few regulations or rule of law, or somewhere where you have support from a local state governor or senator? A great case in point right now in Kentucky, there's a bill that's been pushed forward to really be supportive of digital asset mining. And one of the reasons being is, Core Scientific has a very large facility in Calvert City, Kentucky, and they see the job creation that's actually happening. You have these facilities that are located in derelict parts of the country where manufacturing used to be a big economic driver, and you just have these shells of buildings with great access to power. Well, I can tell you an industry that can use a big building with access to low cost power and to create jobs, and that's digital mining, right? So there's a great overlap for a lot of these what's called has-been regions that really can be future growth opportunities for these communities. So politicians are finally taking notice that these are long-term sustainable jobs in an industry that is no longer deemed to be a great market. I mean, you look at the major institutions and pension funds, hedge funds, they're all looking at Bitcoin digital assets as an anti-inflationary hedge, and the miners, we secure the network. So we're definitely a fundamental, vital part of that ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to get into those sort of institutional players in a moment. But just before I do, it'd be remiss of me not to ask, this is something that comes up so much whenever anyone talks about crypto mining, often, unfortunately, in a negative way, but talking about energy use and sustainability. Now, obviously, you sort of mentioned there that the US has a favorable regulatory space, and, in terms of property rights and stability of governance, that's appealing. But, in terms of raw energy costs, where are you able to see those decent returns come into play, and are you able to do it with a sustainable energy model? And is that something that you guys at Core Scientific think about and focus on?
Absolutely. At Core Scientific, we certainly have an ESG policy that really gets us to focus on renewable or non-carbon based sources of electricity. 100%. We really do want to show stewardship as we can to be able to source low cost renewable power. To speak about the industry generally, most of the best sites are powered by hydroelectric, wind, or solar power. These are non-carbon generating sources of power, and they're the most stable, especially with the mining operation where you want flat, nice, stable power that you can get from a hydro facility, or in combination with a solar and wind farm, you can actually balance it a load pretty well on that as well. To talk about carbon-based power, there's still a need to have carbon-based power to support digital asset mining, and some of the innovations that have been coming out have been taking some of these stranded assets where if it wasn't being used for digital asset mining, it would basically be flared off into the atmosphere. So in a way, we're actually taking what was just general environmental destruction and turning it into something useful. So that's something that needs to be considered by the critics and the folks, the detractors of the space. On the second part of that is there's stranded renewable asset facilities where they may have overbuilt, tidal power, wind power, etc., and no one can actually use that power because the cost of transmission is too high. Well, guess what? You can put a digital asset mining facility that's that's mobile, that's locally managed, to actually use that excess power to make sure that the renewable industry sector that the politicians and the governments put in place still has an ROI for the investors that have sunk in their capital to make it happen, right? So, yeah, I mean, ideally it would be 100% renewable, and that's really the target for folks like Core Scientific. But we're doing what we can to make sure that as much of our power mix as renewable as possible is put in place.
Yeah, certainly a noble goal and a key point about the energy usage of an industry, which often gets accused of being nothing but a sheer waste by those who, frankly, I think don't necessarily understand it.
Well, I mean, there's been several research articles that compare and contrast the traditional banking sector with digital mining, and you would be surprised at how much more power the traditional banking sector consumes in its HVAC requirements alone than digital asset mining today. So I mean, they're sticker shock because you see these facilities, but the thing is, they're concentrated facilities. But if you think of like a standard national bank in any major country, how many branches do they have? How much power do they consume? That HVAC, the AC or the heating, that's all power too, right? You don't think of it that way, but you have to, because when you're looking at it from a BTU or a joule perspective, which is power, they are equivalent, so to speak. So it is quite comparable and far lower than the traditional banking sector. Just to think about.
Certainly valuable to think about. And while we're thinking about, I definitely think so. But while we're talking about banks and institutions in general, let's discuss that institutional investment in this space, because we all know, anyone who's paid even half an eye attention to the crypto space in late 2020, institutions have suddenly started paying attention. They've woken up in ways they haven't before. Could you speak a little bit about, from your perspective, what are you seeing in terms of new investment in the space, if any? How are institutions sort of taking you more seriously, less seriously, differently? Just give us an overview on sort of your view on the institutional investment space.
Well, to reinforce the enterprise and scale play, we're really seeing that on some of the types of clients that we're working with. Core Scientific, we've unfortunately had to stop working with smaller retail clients, and now we're really dealing with commercial, enterprise, and truly institutional clients. We have public companies as some of our clients. So, I mean, this is something that the industry, again, is naturally aggregating to. Again, you're not going to go with your buddy and put in $10, $30, $40, $50, $100 to build a bridge, right? It costs hundreds of millions of dollars, but a pension plan would. And guess what? You probably already have money in a pension plan if it's part of your national retirement strategy, or if it's an institution that you invest in through an ETF. Like you look at the Grayscales of the world. In Canada, you look at the 3IQ, the 3IQs of the world, the ETFs that are put together that pool retail capital into a truly institutional product or instrument that can then deploy on a larger scale. And that's what we're seeing. So people, institutions, high net worth individuals are pooling their capital into special purpose vehicles, and those special purpose vehicles are going after the sector through operations in a much bigger way. So, folks like Core Scientific that really are pushing the boundary on enterprise, we have to really upstream to these larger type clients. So that's something that we're certainly seeing, and many of our competitors and partners in the space are seeing the same thing.
Do you think that crypto mining as a whole represents a safer bet, particularly for those institutional players and those large-scale players, as an investment rather than directly investing in the crypto industry itself with all its volatility and machinations? And why is that?
I mean, if you could buy an apple for 50 cents versus $10, which would you prefer? I mean, When you're looking at a large scale operation with great cost of power, steady operations, audited financials, and you can get access to the instrument that you're looking at for, call it 40% discount to market. I mean, it's a no-brainer for them, right? Also, it's a way to be able to park larger sums of capital and deploy it over longer periods of time versus trying to buy up as much BTC on the market as you can to create price spikes, et cetera, volatility. So again, it's the scale of capital, the time horizons of investment really matches up quite well with larger institutional investors. And again, that's what we're seeing. You're seeing a lot of capital markets activity where investors are finally understanding it, right? Where you go and you invest in a company like Core, a company like Marathon, a company like Riot, Argo, Blockchain, which is also a great partner. That's probably where you're going to be parking your capital versus going and running to a Coinbase or an exchange or an OTC desk to put down $50 million, $100 million, right? So again, it's just matching the characteristics of the investment, the timing, the horizon, and also candidly the volatility.
Right. So then looking about that timing question, because it's and the horizon question, because it's something that always interests me about the crypto mining space. In that, in a lot of ways, at least when we focus in on Bitcoin, there's a little bit of a built-in timeline on it. I mean, there is a built-in timeline. You've got these halvings once every 4 years or so. You're going to see a reduction in the rate of Bitcoin being mined, being produced. And obviously, so far, the industry has kept up, in terms of upscaling the value of the market. But at some point, that's going to have to logistically peter out before we get to 2140 or whenever it is the final sort of halving. I mean, is this something that you guys think about? Is this something that you factor in? Do you consider your industry getting while the getting's good, or do you see an evolution occurring, 1, 2, 3, however many halvings down the line?
That's a great question. For anyone that was around in the space in 2017, 2018, during the Great Winter, where there was a ton of insolvencies because of higher cost operators that couldn't stay afloat. I mean, that's what happens in an economic reality, and that's really what has been driving the fundamentals of Bitcoin, right? Satoshi Nakamoto built in an economic equilibrium, check and balance through the halvening, through the ability for the network to secure itself. And so if the industry overbuilds, naturally there will be a washout of less efficient players. And that's what happened in 2018, end of 2017 after the giant spec bubble that happened then. And so, for the future, that was really just a comment on the past of what's happened before. So, I mean, people who've lived through it expect pain. It's not always just up. Right now with the money printing of the central banks globally, people are getting it. It's an anti-inflationary alternative asset for preserving value in their own portfolio. But going into the future, the whole purpose of the asymptotic curve of the halvening, which is really what the production values of BTC are with the block rewards, is that over time, as the price of BTC increases and the block rewards decrease by half every single halvening, obviously, the transaction values within the blocks themselves should satisfy the economic rent of mining, right? And you're actually seeing that where over the past 5 years, I mean, obviously since the beginning of BTC, but specifically over the past even 24 months, you see the actual transaction value per block increase. And eventually there will be an inflection point where the transaction value will supersede the actual benefit of BTC so that the system itself is self-perpetuating through the transaction volume. There's an argument within the Bitcoin community, specifically the Bitcoin core developers, is do you increase the block size to accommodate this? Right. And there's all sorts of conversations around layer 1, layer 2 protocols that really condense the information contained within the blocks themselves so that you're able to charge a much higher premium to have secondary level information charged and secured through the hash function of the blockchain itself within BTC itself, right? And I don't have an answer for that, but that's some of the economic thinking and rationale around how the network itself can really go through that inflection point of, incentivizing miners not just with BTC block rewards, but the transaction value and revenue itself generated from transactions. Hopefully that answers your question.
But so,
No, I mean, and it's an intense debate, which I don't think we need to get into now, about the size of blocks themselves and whether the block rewards are indeed pay out, and in the longer term there are reams and reams. People have dedicated careers to this sort of conversation. But I guess what I'd say, just to get in some from you, is that you feel confident that the mining industry will be able to evolve with the time and maintain the security of the network.
I do. I mean, I don't think that the 1 megabyte block cap is realistic. I think there needs to be some increase, but I don't think it needs to be to what some purport to require, which is like gigabytes and gigabytes to the blockchain. I don't think that's the purpose. I think there needs to be some increase, but I'll leave that to the core dev team and the ecosystem itself to come to that conclusion. I mean, as a service provider, as a hoster, as a miner, our job is to make sure that the network is secure. And that's what we do well.
Certainly we'll leave it to others to develop that sort of consensus and see how we move forward. All right, but speaking of moving forward, looking out and projecting to 2021, obviously we've kicked the year off with a bang. Bitcoin at the time of filming had a local high of 42, well, all-time high of 42,000. It's we'll see if by the time this goes to air we've re-cracked that. Yeah, almost 42,000 to be fair. Yes. If we've cracked that again, who knows where we'll be by that point. But I mean, what are you sort of thinking about? Looking ahead towards the rest of the year. Getting a little speculative here. What are you sort of projecting out in terms of? And I'm not fixating on price, mind you. Just what are you looking for in terms of innovation, development in the space, in the industry, new exciting things coming online that you're excited about? What's sort of your main focus throughout the new year?
Well, what I'm excited about is clarity and regulations globally. I think the ECB, European Central Bank, U.S. Central Bank, Canadian Central Bank, and others around the world, Australian, etc. They really need to come to terms with what digital assets mean to them from a financial perspective. I mean, in the U.S., the OCC, the Office for the Comptroller, they've put out that they view digital assets as financial instruments, full stop. Right. So I think over 2021, we are really going to see the integration and the acceptance of digital assets in some respect into global financial transactions. I mean, no longer will it be just a potential. It's now yes, this makes sense. Here's a network that's secure. Here's a way for us to do this in a fully digital way. And how do we do that properly? AML is going to be a big theme. OFAC screening of transactions is going to be a big thing. As a miner that is looking at the entire ecosystem, we have to be ahead of this, and we think we are. I mean, you see the advent of the formation of several new pools in North America that are really focusing on that. And because we see the writing on the wall where the regulators from the security side and the financial side are going to be installing their own reviews. And luckily, because it's a fully digital ledger, everything is fully auditable, right? And so as an entity that will be working to secure the network and creating the hash to create blocks, it will be in conjunction with us and the pool providers themselves to make sure that all the transactions are compliant as if they were regular financial transactions in the regular financial ecosystem, which that line will completely disappear over the next 24 months.
The next 24 months, that's an ambitious timeline. I mean, I love to think of it, but given
I'm just keeping it 24 months.
Okay. You think given all the regulatory things that need to take place across the world, all the changes we've gone through with Corona, with everything, you think that'll be enough of a focus that people and regulators will get on board?
100%. I think if SWIFT isn't completely replaced, that type of monetary or economic value exchange system will probably be supplanted by either BTC or some other form of digital asset that most likely the governments will all need to have their fingers in to be able to say that we participated in this creation. Or they might just supplant BTC and say, hey, here's a system, has never been hacked, that works. Large scale enterprise players are securing it. There's a general consensus that this is a store of value. So why don't we just use it? So I would say, yeah, within 24 months, I think digital assets will be part of the truly global financial system.
I love that vision, man. I'm excited to hear that level of optimism, and I think a lot of our viewers are gonna feel the same way. You know that the one thing I think so many feel is holding back this industry right now. Obviously, we've got the institutional buy-in now, we've got the businesses on board, but governments just seem to be so lagging behind across the world in so many ways. I mean, particularly, unfortunately, in the US, there seems to be a dragging of feet. Interesting to see if we are able to get those sort of changes and that it be globalized and sort of interoperable across the world.
Well, with the change of administration happening over the next few days, I think 2021 will have a brand new playbook within the United States specifically. In Canada, you actually had the former Prime Minister Stephen Harper the other day put forward that he actually believes that digital assets are truly financial instruments. So with potential change of government in Canada over the next 24 months, I think that we'll see a lot of progress. All
right, things are changing. It's a brave new world. So much going on. 2021 might have a little bit more light on the horizon than we saw in 2020. Although it depends on where you were standing. The crypto industry wasn't too bad. Wasn't too bad from this space. You know, there was a lot of hurt. But outside of this, anyway. All right, Taras. I want to thank you so much for speaking with us. It's so good to get an inside look at this industry. As I say, it's criminally sort of underviewed, even from those within the crypto space. I don't think people give it nearly enough attention. So I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us, and for everyone watching at home, make sure you keep going with Reimagine. We've got so much content we're putting out to kick off 2021. And Taras, again, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for the invitation.